So yes and is a concept used in improvisational theater, which is an art form that is created entirely in the moment in front of an audience. At the Alzheimer Society of Toronto, I use the concept of yes and to help family members of persons living with dementia to listen and interact in a positive way. The idea here is that you listen, you accept what is said, no matter what it is, you say yes, and you expand on it. And you don't correct the person if you feel they've made an error, or try to orient the person to your reality. Today, I'm applying the concept of yes and in two different ways. First, to emphasize the importance of listening. And second, I'm using it to explore the complexity of life with dementia to encourage us to look beyond simply the negative elements. My father was diagnosed with dementia in 2005, and this diagnosis had an immeasurable effect on my family. 5 years later, I began making artwork with him that I hoped would help me make sense of his diagnosis. With his knowledge and permission, over a period of 2 years, I recorded our conversations and I edited them into 2 sound art pieces. This experience completely changed my outlook on dementia and, by extension, my relationship with my father. Ultimately, what I learned was that, yes, a diagnosis of dementia brings incredible challenges, deep and troubling losses, and fear for the future. And I discovered that there is simultaneously the opportunity for deep connection, shared laughter, mutual support, and love. Toronto researcher and scholar Pia Kontos writes about the characterization of Alzheimer's disease in the media and popular culture, saying, quote, "Alzheimer's disease is considered to be the most frightening condition that faces the aging population in the 21st century, a much feared stigmatizing label that carries with it a sentence of social death. The lay media are replete with descriptions of Alzheimer's, such as a living death. Even the U.S. federal government's advisory panel on Alzheimer's disease describes the person with the illness as one whose mind has been dissolved, leaving only a body from which the person has been removed." End quote. This language is disturbing and can have a devastating effect on an individual's sense of self. It also affects, of course, how others view the person with dementia, thereby influencing both the individual's inner world and her relationships and surroundings. This was certainly the case in my experience. Everything I read or heard about Alzheimer's at the time of my father's diagnosis and in the 5 years following taught me that he was no longer a complete person and was becoming even less complete as his dementia progressed. I could not accept this, and so I began searching for a framework that would make space for my father as a full and complex human being. In my first sound art piece, Sounds of Forgetting, I explore the experience of dementia through a phenomenological lens. I was inspired by the writings of Maurice Merleau-Ponty to explore and ultimately celebrate my dad's life and inherent personhood. In the piece and my accompanying artist statement, I suggested that though his faulty memory and diminishing agency were affecting his sense of self, he rediscovered himself through the world of perception, moment to moment. At one point in the piece, we can hear him shouting in joy, "Live for the moment." I argued that this phenomenological rediscovery infused his life with meaning. I reveled in his ability to live in the moment and interact with the world around him through his senses, and I learned that I could joyfully meet him there. Then in 2012, shortly after my father experienced a drastic decline and spent many months in a hospital, I created a second sound piece called Turning, and I'm going to share it with you today. At the time that I created it, I wrote that turning was a response to the, quote, harsh and almost violent interruptions of my dad's embodied experience of the world, both as a result of the aging process and as a result of the tools, drugs, and devices that were meant to help him. The literal extensions of his body, the plastic tubes, rubber bags, and EKG monitors disrupted his embodied relationship with the world. He had very little control over what happened to his body and when, and there was no ceremony in day-to-day life. With this second piece, I was grappling with a new stage of my father's experience with dementia. I sought to represent these dark and disempowering realities of living with dementia, end quote. Turning is a work of fiction and was edited down to 6 minutes long from about 8 hours worth of material. While the conversations that you're going to hear are real, none of the actions in the piece are real. They were all added in post-production. I would not have interrupted my father in the ways that you will hear, but I wanted to document what I saw happening to and around him. So I would invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to play Turning. It's just about 6 minutes long. Itchy eye? You have an itchy eye?
It'll go away in a minute, I think. That's the sun up there, right?
I think so.
I guess it is, I don't know. Or it's going the wrong, but it's moving that way. Huh. Maybe things are turned around. Oh. Boy, it's... That's the sun, eh? So it's the clouds moving.
Okay, I'm just gonna empty your bag.
Poof. Huh. Oh well. See, I guess I can blow my nose in this thing.
Here's your soup.
Holy badoodle.
And a bun.
So I just eat this? Or...
Yeah, go right ahead. You know what? Before you eat, I'm just going to give you a really quick shave. Your whiskers are getting just a little bit long.
Holy mackerel. Lazy bones, sleeping in the sun. How you gonna get your grateful son? And what? Oh, lazy bones, sleeping in the sun. I sort of remember the days of my youth when I used to understand things. So what do? Eat this and butter this?
If you'd like, yeah.
So what do? Pull this?
Do you get scared when you can't remember things?
Yeah, a little. Not as much as I used to. Like, it's just the way it is. So, I can't do anything about it. I seem to manage a conversation reasonably well. I suppose it'll get worse, and I just don't think about that.
Yeah.
Things are the way they are, and
Papa, I sure hope that you will always remember me.
oh, I will that. I will that.
Good.
Boy. That's the sun, eh? I guess it is. I don't know.
Montreal scholar Kim Sawchuk and I explored this piece in a paper that we wrote for the journal Modern Drama. It's a Canadian journal. And I will share some of our work on the piece here with you now in my examination of Turning. Although Turning was meant to bring to light the darker elements of life with dementia, the listener is left with a sense of lightness. Sawchuk and I discussed that neither my father or I convey fear, loss, or anxiety in the piece. Rather, it is the setting, the cold and impersonal hospital, that is troublesome and perhaps anxiety-provoking. In this way, Turning explores, as Anne Basting might say, the idea that Alzheimer's, this is a quote, Alzheimer's is not a disease of the mind, but also of the environment. This is immensely troubling, as many individuals living with dementia find themselves in hospitals, nursing homes, or other institutional settings. Nevertheless, in this piece, the relationship is what shines through the darkness of the setting. Pia Kontos and others argue that personhood is intrinsically relational. That is, our sense of self is based on our interactions with those around us. In the face of institutional and often disempowering environments, we have the power and the duty to make our relationships more important than disease. Relationships change when a person is living with dementia, and this can be incredibly troubling and confusing. The relationship in turning invites examination, as it may offer hope and an alternative way of viewing our interactions. The scene portrayed is not a typical interaction. Little information is exchanged, no memories are shared, and the words that are spoken are often strange, at times nonsensical. And yet, we are left with a sense that something important, deep, and perhaps even joyful has occurred. Sawchuck and I put the piece in conversation with Jean-Luc Nancy's concept of resonance. Sound is often viewed in purely technical terms as physical vibration in the ear needed for the purpose of sharing information. Sawchuck and I wrote, quote, "In Nancy's terms, however, resonance complicates this technical definition of sound as vibration, blurring the line between entendre as listening and entendre as meaning. Resonance invites relational expressivity and emotional interconnections, an engagement with the place of sound at the edges of meaning that consolidates an understanding of communication as more than merely information exchange." End quote. In turning, meaning is expressed not in the exchange of words so much as within the sounds of our voices, in our pauses, and even in our longer shared silence. Meaning is, perhaps, between the words rather than in the words themselves. In Forget Memory, Anne Basting writes that asking a question and listening to the response demands time, focus, attention, and an acknowledgement that the person is worthy of being heard. Listening, really listening, is a lost art. Resonant listening may be one way for us to rediscover this art form, and yes, and may be another. When you are with a person who has dementia, listen carefully and openly. Don't just listen to the words that are spoken, listen to the tone of the voice, pay attention to facial expressions and body language, and stay with the emotion and the meaning behind and between the words. Meet the person where they're at, in the moment, and if you can, build on what they are saying. It's not always easy, but it's worth a try. You have the opportunity to connect deeply and meaningfully in the moment, and you may be surprised by what happens. Engaging with my father in meaningful ways, having conversations, talking about our feelings, laughing, singing, even just sitting together quietly over a cup of soup, infused both of our lives with meaning and reminded us both of our inherent personhood. Furthermore, as Sawchuck and I discuss, this relationship was not unidirectional, as is often assumed in a relationship where one person has dementia. Up until near the end of the piece, the listener hears me moving around the room in a position of carer, ensuring that my father's needs are met. Then, abruptly, we hear, both in my words and in my tone, a moment of vulnerability, an invitation to be nurtured. "Papa, I hope that you will always remember me." Immediately, my father responds, lovingly, assuringly, strongly, "Oh, I will that. I will that." Yes, my father is being cared for, and he is also caring. Yes, living with dementia involves incredible loss, stress, and fear. There is no doubt of this, and I see it every day in my role as a social worker at the Alzheimer Society of Toronto. And if we allow for it, it can also involve incredible opportunities for pure moments of love, laughter, and deep connection. My dad remained integrally connected to those around him through shared experiences of the world, through music, through physical contact, through conversation, and through love. He had dementia for almost a third of the time that I knew him, which was most of my adult life. It was in these years that our relationship became even more special, and he taught me so much about the simplicity of love, kindness, and tenderness. And I know that I was important to him too. His last words were when he told me that he loved me. Some of the most beautiful and purest moments of my life occurred with my father in the last few years of his life, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Thank you.